Radio Week 2021. Live on connectonair.com and remoteradioweek.org.
Connect on Air.
Remote Radio Week proposes distinct programs in English, French, Spanish and Arabic, featuring experts, examples, debates. UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Get ready for a week devoted to helping radio stations broadcast remotely. Live on connectonair.com and remote-radio-week.org.
Welcome again to UNESCO Remote Radio Week. This is day one and our first panel. The first Remote Radio Week panel discussion will delve into the role of radio in a pandemic or any type of crisis. Whatever the crisis, whenever it hits, one of the most important things is that good leaders need to act decisively. And in this discussion, radio executives from different parts of the world who you'll meet just now will help us understand what happened when COVID-19 hit in their communities. How did they respond? Are there learnings from this moment that can help others better prepare for future crises? How did they balance the personal safety of every member of their team with radio's mission to keep listeners informed at the moment of their greatest need? Are there benefits that radio provides in a crisis that's unique to the medium of radio? All of this is what we're going to talk about this morning. Thank you wherever you are joining us. And of course, it's not morning everywhere. To discuss these questions, I'm joined by Trish Taylor, Chief Broadcasting Officer at Prime Media Broadcasting in South Africa. I'm also joined by Chief Content Officer of Radio Mirchi in India, Tapas Sen, and Suman Basnat, the Regional Director, Asia Pacific for the World Association of... Did I say that correctly? Because I think you had a bit of a giggle there, Suman. Did I say your name correctly? I hope I did.
No, not really. I mean, that was absolutely correct.
Good. The Regional Director, Asia Pacific for the World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters. And a reminder to all the delegates watching this particular session, you have the opportunity, as you're watching, to submit questions for our panel. We'll see those questions come in. And of course, our moderators working at the back end will choose some of those questions. We can't answer all of them. And then I'll put them to the panel at the end of our conversation. So all of you watching, you have an opportunity to get more insight than you may be getting from the conversation we're having. And please feel free to use that particular option. Let's start with you, Trish. At your station in South Africa, were you prepared for COVID-19?
Thanks, Omar. I think to a degree we were prepared. From the get-go, we set up a business continuity task team, which was made up of our on-air staff, the programming staff, management, as well as technical teams. And that task team, ensured that we were, on air 24/7. And I think that, establishing that task team up front with multiple views from different parts of the organization was really good. So to a degree, we were prepared. I think what we weren't anticipating was the length of the lockdown. So in South Africa, our president announced a lockdown that would last 3 weeks. Little did we know that lockdown would be in the region of 18 months. So whilst there was no dead air on our side, what we weren't anticipating was how long lockdown would be. And so I think if we had had the foresight of how long it would be, I think we probably would have prepared slightly differently. So to answer your question, yes and no.
So let me, because you brought that up, I want to probe a little further. When you say you might have prepared a little differently, can you give me an example of what would have been done differently had you known it was going to be longer than the 3 weeks?
Yeah, so we adopted a bit of a hybrid model where we had some presenters broadcasting from the studio and some having home kits, broadcasting live from home. And so I think that that became a bit clumsy as lockdown continued. And as presenters, obviously we're getting ill, we're getting infected with COVID. Likewise, our producers, it actually put quite a lot of strain on the business. I think that if we had known it was going to be 18 months, I think what we would have done is we would have intensified the rollout of home kits and ensured that we had a complete remote way of working as opposed to the hybrid model in which we adopted.
Okay, that's really good insight. Thank you. Tapas Sen from Radio Mirchi in India. Tell us a bit more about the situation as it unfolded. You're based in Delhi, but tell us what happened in your station.
So, to answer your question, whether we were we prepared for it or not, you can prepare for something which you know about. You can prepare for a flood, you can prepare for a fire, you can prepare for war. This is something we didn't even know what it was about. In fact, let me tell you this: that in India, in the month of March, probably the most Googled word was pandemic. We had all heard of epidemic, and we understood that pandemic was probably an upgrade on epidemic. But what was it? We had no idea. Okay, and to get health warnings in India is not so uncommon. Every season, for example, right now the government is issuing dengue warnings. There are malaria warnings coming every year, so it's not uncommon for the government to issue community health warnings, and we heard it, and we were kind of saying that, okay, fine, let's just tighten our belts, etc. But nothing more than that. We really had no idea about the scale, about its intensity, about its longevity. We really had no idea. We were saying that yes, we are mentally getting ready, and then the tolls started increasing, and we started getting scared. But we've all of us as human beings always believe that if there's something bad that's going to happen, it's going to happen to the other person. The bad thing never happens to you. And we were also feeling the same thing, that okay, fine, it's some people will get ill and we must be ready. People will not turn up for work. That's okay. We were more bothered with the more administration of really the radio station more than a national or a global problem. We really had very little idea, I have to say that.
So what did that mean when the first effects came into your own environment, into your radar, into your radio station? Were you with your pants down, as it were, and you didn't know what to do next?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So as a radio station, we are not new to crises. Mm-hmm. We just need to know the shape of the crisis. That is what is important. So the moment that the first case started happening and we started realizing that it's at our doorstep, it's no more in Italy, it's no more in a remote country in China, it is now on our doorstep, right? Everything changed. The first thing that we had to decide really was, we have 71 radio stations. It's probably one of the largest networks in the world. And we operate from 63 different cities. India is a very, very large country. We had to take a call overnight, literally overnight, whether we're going to go live or whether we're going to switch to some different technology. And we're a music station, Omar, don't forget that. We are a complete music station. We don't even do news, but we do a lot of community service. So What we did was, the biggest decision we did was that the moment we realized the intensity of it, we converted our all music radio station into an all talk radio station, because the most important thing during a pandemic or during any crisis is information. So that's what we went for.
Thank you very much for that, Tapas. Because obviously, when it come back to you and to Trish and everyone, just to ask how that technological shift that had to happen, what was required, the gravity, the intensity, the costs, that's all coming up. Let me get to you, Suman. What was it like in the areas that you operate in, among the stakeholders that you were engaged with?
Thanks, Omar. Thanks for having me here. Pleasure to be in a very interesting group. I second much of what Tapas has said. I'm representing community radios, which are mostly rural and semi-urban based small community operated radio stations. In most of the areas of broadcasting, we were quite ill prepared, as much as the rest of the world was. I'm talking about radio stations that operate with very little resource in terms of human resource or technological resource and so on and so forth. Very little resource to spare for preparations, for instance, for any kind of disaster for that matter. But on the other hand, I'll tell you what we were really very well prepared for, because we are community rooted, because the radio stations are operated by people in the community. We knew the language. We already spoke the language. We already knew the community so well, because the broadcasters were members of the same community, are members of the same community. They understood the problems. They could see the problems from they had a much closer view of what was happening in the community. So when they had the possibility, when they had the information, when they had the means to distribute the information, they were able to give out the information that was really required by the community. So in that aspect, we were really well prepared, I would say.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Well, I want to now move to the questions that that essentially emanate from the discussions we've just had, which is, were you prepared? What did you have to do? And that is, you needed to change the way you broadcast. You needed to change certain processes. You needed to prepare the people that are critical, that's on the coalface, your presenters that are getting the information out to communities, prepare them for a different way of working. So I want to understand, while you were protecting your people, what role did technology play in your response? I want you to explain specifically the technologies you adopted, the processes that might have had to change when you knew this was really serious. Please talk me through that. Let's start with you this time, Tapas.
Okay, so let me first tell you the changes that we made, and then I'll tell you how we use technology to do that. Okay, so the first biggest change, like I rightly said, was that we moved from all music to all talk radio station. Now, when we had talk, remember, radio is a completely local medium. So the national television and newspapers, everything was giving out news that was happening all over the world and all over India. We had to focus on each city and localities. So the next new word that we came across was lockdown. We had not heard this word, seriously. I mean, we just knew it as an English word. And we didn't know what it meant. Again, we didn't know the shape of it. It meant everything was going to close down. Does it mean that I don't get milk? I don't get food? What about my medicines? Nobody in the country had any idea. This is the first time an entire nation of over 2 billion people were going into something called lockdown. So we had to crack it before other people really could. So we had to crack it and tell them, hey, listen, wait, your markets are going to open, essential items are going to be available, etc., etc. Now, the complication arose because every state had a different policy. The entire lockdown was governed, was announced by the central government, but was actually implemented by the state governments. So in some states, the shops would open for a particular time. In other states, they would have specific times for people to go out and shop. So it was very, very different. So the first thing we had to do was collect this information and then disseminate it. The second thing we had to do was that our jocks were not going to come to office. So that's where technology came into the picture, right? We have 155 jocks across these 71 radio stations. We gave all of them remote access to the log. Now, once you're on radio, you know that's not a big thing. But yes, it was being done for the first time and at a huge scale. If it was 1 or 2 or 3 different radio stations with 5 or 10 people, this is 63 people, 155 people. At 7 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, the first word was going out. And we had to make all the changes overnight, literally. So everybody almost all of them had microphones. They were given remote access. They downloaded the app and whatever was required. And then they started actually speaking into the log itself. So they spoke whatever they had to, and they posted it in the log, say 30 seconds before it went on air. And at the same time, we had to set up a network which is collecting all this information. So we had 3 teams: collection, verification, and distribution. So there was one team which was just collecting information. The second team was verifying it, because on radio, we just could not depend on just normal social media or WhatsApp. And the third team finally said, okay, fine, this information is going at 9 o'clock, this is going at 9:15, this is 9:20. So technology, as well as a huge amount of networking. Of course, it helped with the fact that we are part of one of the largest newspapers in the world, the Times of India. So we revitalized all our network connections and everything. So it was a change of content. It was a change of the entire broadcast. And of course, the entire technology was at the backbone of it, which made this entire thing possible.
Tapas, thanks. And while I have a break before I go to Trish, I just wanted to introduce Martin Kafafo, who's just joined us, Group General Manager of Radio Africa Group in Kenya. Thanks for being here as well, Martin. I'm going to come to you as we continue this discussion. Trish, tell us about technological change in South Africa. What were the challenges? What worked? What didn't work?
Yeah, so we rolled out Beringer Euphoria home kits. As I said, we went on a hybrid model, which in retrospect was we'd probably do that differently. The other tech that we rolled out was something called Clean Feed, which is an audio app, and we use that for our reporters and contributors that would contribute, especially to our talk shows. We run a series of talk stations as well as music stations. I have to say, I think our music stations was a lot easier to run than our talk stations. Given a talk show typically has a whole bunch of producers and technical producers and various contributors. So the talk side of our business was definitely more challenging. Omar, because you're from South Africa, you will know at that time we were also had load shedding. And for those of you who don't know, load shedding, we had electricity problems, which meant at certain stages our electricity would go off. And so, load shedding, we had COVID, and then we also, during this whole time towards the end of the third wave, we had riots in Gauteng and KZN. So we had actually, 3 crisis situations to deal with at the same time. And I think that our remote planning was pretty sound actually and worked pretty well. The thing that we weren't anticipating, just from a change management process perspective, is the strain on our people. And so, things like our producers had to come in, irrespective, because of the hybrid model that we had adopted. And what we didn't anticipate was actually the mental and the emotional strain on, some of our employees. And so from a change management process, we probably could have planned things a lot better, because it's one thing getting the tech right, but you've got to have people as part of that, the whole business continuity process. And bearing in mind that, people were suffering from people in their family dying and obviously being affected as well. So, and so that was an area I think was a bit of a blind spot for us, that certainly through multiple crises hitting you at one time. It's one thing, keeping on air. It's another thing, keeping your team focused and motivated.
Very powerful point. Very powerful. Suman, tell us a bit about that experience among, again, your stakeholders, the community radio stations working in rural areas. The people issues, and I'll get to Martin next. Thanks for joining us, Martin. Go ahead, Suman.
Yeah, sure, Omar. A very, very traumatic experience, of course. On one hand, you have people at the station being affected, their family members being affected, people under very stressful conditions. The work from home did not really apply for broadcasters. I would like to remind you of the background once again. I'm talking about community radios that are based in very rural, remote locations where, pandemic or no pandemic, technology has always been a challenge. Connectivity, internet has always been a challenge. Simple things like not having to do with a desktop computer instead of a laptop computer made it all the more difficult. Not enough handheld recorders, for instance, that would make you mobile was a difficulty. We had often talked about, in principle, discussed the issue of decentralized broadcasting, decentralized policy making, decentralized ownership of media, diversity, and all of that. But the pandemic kind of forced us to go into a situation where decentralization of broadcast really had to take place, meaning it was impossible for everyone to come and operate in the regular way, the way a regular FM station broadcasts. That is, everybody gathers in one place, the station is centralized, producers, the broadcasters, the studio is in one place, and so on and so forth. Here you are having to your people are scattered all over, and that works perfectly if you have good connectivity, if you have the right equipment with you, whereas the community radios did not have that. So that came across as a huge challenge. Of course, we acquired, adapted as we moved along, but in the beginning it was really, that was one of the biggest difficulties the community radios had.
Did they shut down, Suman? Did they have to shut down? Did some stations stop broadcasting because of the...
I'm glad you asked that, because I'm talking about areas where people are entirely dependent on community radios to receive any kind of information, to exercise their right to communicate as well. These are areas where there is no other media available. Television is out of question because electricity is not there everywhere. Newspapers simply do not reach there, and literacy levels are very low commercial radios do not see any interest to broadcast in those areas. So people are entirely dependent on. So if a community radio shut down, what you'll have is essentially a blackout of information, and you wouldn't let that happen. And that was a huge challenge. So not only were you trying to inspire, encourage your broadcasters to work harder, provide them the right content, the information, and all of that, but at the same time also provide them the technological input that was required to remain in operation all the while.
Yeah, I see. So yeah, very challenging, no doubt. Martin, in Kenya, just as we lose him, broadband seems to be turning around and around. I hope we'll get him back. But if we don't, we're going to carry on and talk about the impact on audiences. So obviously, as you make the shifts, you have people broadcasting from home. You have some challenges, as you described very eloquently there, Trish, about people really just, having personal challenges with members of their family succumbing in some cases. How did audiences respond? Because I'm sure that comes across. I mean, radio is always considered a very intimate medium. So if there are presenters under stress, if there are other people under stress, it comes over. It can be, sometimes one can pick it up listening to the radio. What happened with audiences? Let's start with you, Trish.
Well, I think that one thing that we did tell our presenters is to be as authentic as possible and to share their own, their own life experience. So, we had presenters actually being extremely vulnerable on air in terms of the fact that they were broadcasting from home, they were infected by COVID, their worries, their fears, their concerns, the stress about their family. So I think that kind of authenticity created a very deep connection with the audience. Understanding, certainly, in South Africa and probably elsewhere in the world, mental health became a massive challenge. And so for presenters to create that connection and those Me Too moments with other people that were taking strain and really sort of connecting with the zeitgeist of society, I think was extremely powerful. So during this time, our stations made extremely powerful radio, and I think our audiences really resonated with that. And certainly from our research perspective and our latest audience measurement surveys, audiences actually spent more time listening to radio than ever before. I think with the amount of fake news as well as the different lockdown requirements, as Tapa said, I mean, radio became the go-to medium in terms of the most up-to-date information. And as we all know, radio is an ideal medium when it comes to crises. And I think that, if anything, our brands gained that kind of listener intimacy that radio is really renowned for.
Tapas?
Yeah, so in India, there are two different narratives which ran, one after the other. The wave one was one completely different story, and the second wave was a completely different narrative altogether. In fact, when you're in the middle of the COVID 2, the first round almost seemed like a honeymoon, because it was so bad. It was so bad. But your question is more on the audience responses. So let me answer that. Radio is always a very, very strong community player, and I think to that extent, Mirchi is the same. And we've had great, very intimate relationships with our audiences. So let me just jump a little to a post-COVID scenario, which you will really love. The biggest loss of the first wave of COVID, the biggest loss, more than lives, was livelihood. The number of people who lost their jobs was unimaginable. We were on a more economic epidemic that was about to happen than anything else. So people, and from very respectable families, they were looking for jobs, So one of the things that we did just after the COVID got over was our group has a very strong job portal. We got in touch with all companies and we have worked very hard to find out who have started to hire. And we actually found out 700 positions, Omar, 700 positions that were going to be advertised. We requested those companies to advertise it through Radio Mirchi. And we said, why don't you let us find the right candidate? And if you're not satisfied, then you can go somewhere else. And we did this for about 2 weeks, massive campaign on giving away jobs. It was like a job fair, And by the end of the 15th day, all candidates we had put up 674 candidates for about 674 positions. All of them got a job.
Wow.
So
Amazing.
we felt so good about the fact that we could actually make a difference to 674 families. In India, it's 674 into 4. And that really, so that's just an anecdote to tell you the kind of responses that we got. And I could tell you one more if you have the time.
Of course we do. Go ahead.
So I'm just going a little beyond COVID, because crisis is not new to radio stations. Like someone was saying that we operate at the community level. So quite some time back in Mumbai, and you're familiar with Mumbai, it had massive floods and everything came to a standstill, and people had to start walking to go back homes. And since you're familiar with Mumbai, people may have to walk 20, 30, 40 kilometers. They're completely dependent on trains. Okay. And we told people that, hey, listen, people are just on the roads, they're walking. Can you just step out of your houses with just a bottle of water? Because they have been walking for 10, 20 kilometers. Believe me, Omar, the entire Mumbai city was lined with people holding water and holding food. We didn't ask for food, but everyone turned up there. I mean, it was almost like a picnic at times. People just sat down, they had food, and it was a very, very memorable moment. This is the dividend that you get to work with the community. So that's the best I can tell you in terms of examples of of response, the audience response.
I think important and powerful anecdotes that show to a lot of people that radio remains very powerful, very intimate, great relationships with its audiences, as long as you do the right thing. And I think your story indicates that, and the stories we've heard indicate that if you're in touch with your community and you understand at a particular moment what they need and you deliver to that need, that's how you build that trust. Suman, audiences to those community stations in those rural areas, what were the responses there?
Omar, I think it's been very eloquently stated already that radio is very close to people, to communities of people, and especially at times of crisis, the closeness the proximity becomes even more deeper and stronger. When the pandemic began, the challenge for community radios at that time, the engagement with the community was limited to providing some very basic health and hygiene information, such as to wash your hands 20 seconds, use a mask if available, keep your hands clean, don't touch your face, and so on and so forth. That was in the initial stage, what we now generally refer to as the first phase of communication. Then you enter into the second phase of communication, where you want to engage with community members. You want to bring in community members into your content. You want to increase their participation in your production and broadcasting. You want other stakeholders to come in and contribute to the program, because in the initial first stage you were just broadcasting mostly public service announcements, very short announcements which was mostly one-way communication. Now you want to enhance that. You want to bring in more players. But at that time, still you were discussing issues of public health and so on and so forth. But now slowly we have arrived at a stage which is generally known as, among community broadcasters across Asia Pacific region, in fact, as the third phase of engagement, where you are now dealing not only with issues of public health, the health consequences of pandemic, but you're also dealing with other issues like COVID-induced poverty, for instance. Poor people are definitely hit much more harder than anybody else by the pandemic, or gender-based violence, or abuse of human rights, freedom of expression, and not having an access to your entitlement, and so on and so forth. So now COVID is no longer only a public health issue. It's become so much more. I think there's not a single area of life or human beings that has not been touched in a very negative fashion by this pandemic. And community radios are very, very quickly and in a very consistent manner addressing those issues. So that's where we stand. I mean, community radios. I think I would also like to say that community radios are the only mode of media or broadcasting where the consumer and the producer of media are the one and the same. You know, so the engagement with community is looked at, analyzed in a very different way, because it's not someone else producing and broadcasting for somebody else. It's farmers broadcasting for the farmers, young people broadcasting for the young people, and so on and so forth. So it takes a completely new dimension in that regard.
Suman, I'm very glad you brought up all of the ancillary, I think is the right word, effects that have happened as a result of what we've all experienced, because that's one of the reasons this UNESCO Remote Radio Week is discussing issues of gender violence, gender-based violence, and various other issues that you raised, because this pandemic has unleashed greater issues than just a healthcare crisis, a mental health crisis. There's so many other things that we're dealing with that, as you say, radio stations have to engage with their audiences if they care enough, and they will, and they should. I want to move on to trying to understand, as you reflect on your approach, because one of the reasons we're having this panel is that there are many radio owners, radio managers from around the world who are watching this, and part of the reason they're watching this, they want to learn. Some of them might have had very poor responses to the crisis. Some of them may have made mistakes that they didn't recover from. Some of them may have shut down. Some of them may have had excellent response. We don't know. And we're hoping that will come through in the questions and answers and the comments. But as you reflect on your own experiences, now put yourself in the position of an expert, in which you are, because you faced it, and say to or talk to the people who are watching and listening about things that you would say would make up the best possible template to prepare for a future crisis of any type. It doesn't have to be healthcare. So if we can just go ahead and you think about that, and then now say to others how you think a perfect or as good as possible response would be. Let's start with you, Tapas.
So the first, of course, is the technological preparation, and I've always believed this. In today's day and age, technology is on the tap. Technology is really not the most difficult piece. Yes, it just takes a little time to put it together. Like Trish had to, move to a hybrid model first, and then if you knew the extent of it, you would have fixed it at the first place. It was not a tech problem. It was just that you were getting ready for a shorter period of time. So technology is not the area where we learned the lesson. We learned the lesson in 2 or 3 different areas, and I can summarize it by what we say here in India now is the I&M model. Okay, and I'll explain that. The 2 most precious things during any crisis, the first is, of course, information, and the second is mobilization, the I&M model. That's what we call it. So a radio station, it is impossible for any radio station to really start directly working on the ground at a large scale. You can do it at a small scale. You can do it for a small community, a small part of the city. But if you're staying in cities which are as large as more than 20 million people, it is impossible for you to actually do the activations job. You have to become the conduit for any social change or any help. So we realized during this time that the most important thing is, of course, information. And as we speak, as we get ready for a COVID-3, God forbid, we are saying that all sources of information needs to be revitalized, need to be well-oiled, and needs to just come in at the press of a button. And the second most important thing, like I said, is the mobilization. It is only us or the radio stations which can give out a call for asking people to step out on the road with a bottle of water. And that happens. It's only us who can ask corporates to say, hey, listen, people need a job. So walk that extra mile and hire somebody even if you don't need them. So this power of radio is something that we've always known about. It's not new, but it's something that we felt in our bones. And this is a point where we made a difference. And we feel very, very good about that, And the third point is a rather idealistic point, Omar, is that it also revitalized our faith in human beings. No matter how bad people are, all of us included, it is amazing that when you actually make a humanitarian appeal, what will people not do? they will, like I said, they will come out on roads. In many branches, we actually ask for monies or food. You'll be surprised at the kind of collection that we had. Something we thought we would do in 1 week, we did in 1 day. It is amazing. So that's a lesson we've learned, that don't undersell the goodness in human nature. It really works. Appeal to them at a time of crisis. It will always work.
Those are really good insights. Suman, give us some of yours and the template that you would use for community radio stations globally.
Omar, I think there've been plenty of very, very valuable lessons that we've learned along the way. Pandemic is unfortunately not over, so the learning continues. But for this moment, I would like to focus on the preparation part. And in the context of community radios, I think the preparation has to take place in 4 areas. Firstly, it's internally. First of all, you need to make sure that your human resource is prepared to deal with traumatic situations, and that doesn't happen automatically. You really have to prepare your volunteers, your staff members, to deal with situations like this. It's the first time we've had a pandemic of this scale. I hope it's the last time. But unfortunately, other kind of disasters, such as earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, landslides, forest fires, are nothing new to us. They happen almost on a regular basis, and that's terrible. Secondly, you need to have content prepared in advance. You cannot start preparing your content once an emergency situation strikes you. It has to be done in advance. It has to be stored in a strategic manner, so that if one store falls, you still have access to another one to access that content. Thirdly, I think technical preparation is very, very important. I think it's more important now for rural radios, community radios, to invest on portable equipment. I think very generally, I would sum it like that. In the second area is, it's very important that you know your audience really well. You understand the vulnerabilities of your audience, of your community. You understand what is actually required by your community in times of crises, or the demography of your area, of your location, so that you, in times of crisis, you really address that well. Thirdly, very briefly put, again, policy is critically important. I'll give you an example. There were many areas in South Asia, for instance, where there was absolutely no information, a complete blackout, serious dearth of information, because there was no media. The only possible media could have been a radio, but there was no radio station. And it's impossible to start a radio station overnight unless the government of that place allows for emergency portable broadcasting, emergency broadcasting, mobile broadcasting, and that most governments do not allow. I know of cases from across the region, from India, from Bangladesh, from Nepal, where it was really needed, it was not allowed. And I think those policies have to be changed. Radio, it's very clearly established over and over again. This pandemic has proven it beyond any doubt that it's absolutely necessary. Radio is an absolutely necessary tool when it comes to crisis, when it comes to disaster and emergency situations. So you have to have policies that support that kind of understanding. And fourthly, I would just like to call upon the donors and important organizations like UNESCO, which has, by the way, played an extremely important part in the region in strengthening community broadcasting, so that people, and especially in the context of the pandemic, I would like to stress on the fact that donors need to spend a lot more on the preparation part. The support that is received in the aftermath of disaster is extremely valuable, and donors have been very generous, including UN agencies. But I think we need to also focus a lot on the preparation, because these things do not really take up, they do not get that kind of attention when everything is all right. But then that's exactly when you need to do the preparation, and that's if you're well prepared, you really deal with it well. Otherwise, you simply plan to fail. Not planning is, as they say, not planning is to plan to fail.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an important learning. But I think I guess I would have something else to say if we were having this discussion 6 months later, because as I said, the pandemic is still around, people are still suffering, and there are new issues that are coming up every day.
Thank you for that, Suman. Let's round up in South Africa.
Yeah, I agree with Tapas and Suman. I mean, it is about prep. And just from a business continuity perspective, is just making sure that you have multiple lenses on business continuity, because as Tapa said, the tech side of things is probably the easiest. It's the other things, and as we know, radio is all about human beings. It's all about what comes through the speakers, the content makers, and I think it's it's critical to also have a sense of the mental health of your team, and constantly looking at ways of communicating with people remotely, communicating with your staff, your on-air presenters and your producers and reporters that are putting their lives at stake each and every single day, going out into the field and just making sure that you're connecting with those people, and offering them support. And as Suman said, it's one thing dealing with a crisis situation when you're in it, but to take into account the long-term effects for not only your audience, but actually your staff as well. So, in our situation, we went through retrenchments. So, people in our organization were retrenched, and the impact that has on the people that remain in your business is also, it's traumatic for them as well. And so to take into account, what does your business look like after the crisis? Or, as the crisis morphs and changes is also important, and to give, due prep and consideration to, what is the long-term effect on something like this on the well-being of your staff. And what we have found in South Africa certainly is, many people are leaving media. Many people are just burnt out and tired and are actually leaving the medium. And so, for us, it's how do we retain, how do we create a succession planning for people that, want to leave the medium. And so it's, as Tapa said earlier on, you can prep all you like, but you are thrown with, multiple scenarios all the time. And I think as long as you keep close to your people and have, real heart and real care and real conversations with your teams, once again, our people and our medium respond well in crisis, but it is really about that open communication the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. We've got a couple more minutes, and I thought I'd just throw this in. Do you think, when each of you considers, anyone can answer this, this is not specific to any one of you because we just don't have the time to go around the table, as it were, but were there lessons that any of you learned from somebody else, some other organization that you'd seen respond previously that perhaps you adopted? Was there a textbook? Was there an example from other organizations that you've seen? Any one of you? Or was this just, it was entirely having to make it up on your own as you went along, depending on how the crisis morphed and changed and evolved?
I think if I can just respond, one of the things that I learned from a tech organization is they had full-time psychologists on standby the whole time for their staff and for their leaders. They had professional executive coaches on standby 24/7. And I think that, that was fantastic. It certainly helped them navigate the more difficult aspects of business continuity, and that's your people. And I think that that's certainly a lesson I took on board in terms of going forward. How do we create better, more sophisticated support mechanisms for our people?
If anybody else wants to contribute, we've still got a minute or so.
I would just like to add, if I may, Omar, that fact-checking, dealing with disinformation and fake news has now become a regular feature even in a small, remotely based community radio station. And because you cannot spare additional resource to do that, that can happen only when you have functional working relationship with organizations that can provide you verified, validated information. So that is a new aspect that you've added to your entire broadcasting exercise, and that's been a very, very important lesson that we are learning at this moment and trying to strengthen our learning in that regard. Fact-checking, fighting disinformation has become critical and part of everyday broadcasting of even a small remotely based radio station.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tapa Sen, Trish Taylor, Suman Basnat, for the information, the wisdom, the fact that you've had to go through probably the most trying times you've ever had to in your entire careers, as managers, not just broadcast managers, but managers of organizations, managers of people. These lessons, I hope, will assist many others who are watching to prepare for what is likely to be future crisis. No question about it. We're going to have more of these sorts of things happen. We're a globally connected world, and these lessons are going to be useful to those who are watching. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you for agreeing to be part of UNESCO Remote Radio Week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Connect on Air.
UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Live on connectonair.com and remoteradioweek.org.
Connect on Air.
UNESCO Remote Radio Week 2021. Get ready for a week devoted to helping radio stations broadcast remotely. Live on connectonair.com and remote-radio-week.org.